What's going on, everybody? I'm Johnny Brook. Welcome back to another Crafted Workshop video, and welcome to my backyard, and welcome to the biggest series I have ever done here on the Crafted Workshop channel. I'm going to be building a house, start to finish, from scratch. I'm going to be covering the entire process, all the way from designing the building to getting permits to obviously starting construction, all the way through to the end of the build. Hopefully you guys are as excited as I am. I've been working on this in the background for at least 6 months now, but I captured a ton of footage during the build process up to this point, so I'm going to be covering everything. If you're interested in learning how to build a house from scratch, or if you just find construction interesting, go ahead and get subscribed and ring that notification bell, because I plan to put out these videos every week. So in this first video, I'm going to be talking about why we're building a guest house here in our backyard, the entire permitting and approval process, as well as the design process, and then getting the site prepped for building, because obviously we have a pretty wooded backyard and definitely needed to do some work before we could start doing any construction. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this project. So in case you missed it, my wife and I just had our second kid, and with the addition of that second kid, our main house is getting a little cramped for our guests. And rather than move to a bigger house, since we love our neighborhood and our house, we decided that building a small guest house in our backyard would both give our guests an awesome place to stay when they're visiting, but it would also make for an awesome experience for me building a house from scratch, which has always been on my bucket list. When we decided to move forward with planning the design side of the build, I reached out to architect Rick Kazebee, a fellow North Carolinian who I'd been in contact with through Rick being a fan of my videos. And the funny thing is, I was a fan of Rick's work before I even knew him, as he was the lead design architect on the gorgeous New Belgium brewery here in Asheville. And Rick's design style matches mine perfectly, with a super clean, modern aesthetic utilizing simple, well thought out design elements. And Rick is also a maker with one of the nicest looking workshops I've ever seen, and after chatting, we decided to kind of approach this house build as a collaboration. The design for this building went through several iterations, some based on my input, but the majority of which were kind of forced upon us due to our very strict HOA. The initial design concept had the building located along the southern perimeter of our property and featured a pier and beam floor system, which gave the building an almost treehouse feel. The building featured a shed roof, tons of glass, and a beautiful modern aesthetic. After Rick came up with this initial design, I dug a little deeper into the constraints laid out by our HOA for these types of structures and realized that this building was both too tall, since we have a maximum ridge height of 16 feet, and slightly too large, since the footprint is limited to 750 square feet, which includes any attached decks. To solve the height problem, Rick relocated the building to the western perimeter of our property, rotating at 90 degrees, which meant the grade difference was much less severe from one end of the building to the other, and this in turn allowed the overall height to be much lower. Rick also swapped most of the deck for a retaining wall and paver patio, which is considered part of the landscaping rather than part of the building, which solved the footprint issue. I submitted the application on August 6th of 2020 and received a reply from the HOA about a week later, denying my application due to the guest house not matching our main house, being essentially too modern, and there didn't seem to be much flexibility in featuring design styles that were different from our main house. So we made a number of changes, including altering the roof style from a shed roof to a gable roof, switching the roofing material from a metal roof to architectural shingles, and ditching the alternate material for the siding material on the bump out on the backside of the building. After submitting the updated design on September 3rd, we were again denied a few weeks later on September 18th. At this point, I really needed to get things moving, as I was hoping to have a dried-in building by the time our baby arrived, and my wife's due date was November 13th, just a few months ahead of the current time. We further bent to the will of the HOA to push for approval, ditching the sliding privacy screens and completely removing the deck, and resubmitted the design on September 29th. Finally, on October 8th, just over 2 months after submitting my initial application, I received HOA approval, with the caveat that some additional landscaping would be required around the building after construction. With the HOA stamp on the building plans, I could finally submit my building permit application so I could actually get to building. All right, guys, so I'm here at the Buncombe County Permits and Inspections Office, and this is where I apply for the building permit. So the permitting process is basically submitting the permit that has all the information on the house location, the PIN number. Then I also have to list the different subcontractors, all the trades that I'm going to be working with. So in my case, that's going to be an electrician and a plumber. I'm going to find out if I have to use an HVAC technician. I'm going to be using the Mr. Cool kind of DIY mini split systems in this house. Hopefully they'll let me do that myself. itself. So the cost of a building permit here in Buncombe County is $500, and basically that goes to paying for all of the inspections I'm going to get throughout the process, which there are quite a few of. I have to get the footings inspected before I actually build the structure itself. I have to get the framing inspected. I have to get the electrical and plumbing inspected. I have to get the insulation inspected, and then there are lots of other little inspections along the way, just kind of checkpoints there. It's going to be quite the process, but this is really the first step now that the HOA has signed off on the building. So let's go ahead and go inside. I don't think I'm going to be able to film in there, so I'm not even going to try, and go ahead and get the building permit submitted. So evidently first I had to go to the zoning department here and get a zoning permit. So now back into the permitting office to get my building permit. All right, so that didn't go exactly as planned. So evidently I need a few more things before I can actually submit for the building permit. First of all, I have to fill out this documentation on the sewer line, since we're gonna be tapping into our existing sewer line. I have to get a lien agent, which I'm not really sure why I need to do that, but since the building is gonna cost more than $30,000, I have to do that. And then I also have to get an engineer, I guess, to stamp the building plans, which I wasn't under the impression that I did need that. So not able to actually apply for the permit quite yet. Need a few more pieces of documentation, so I'll get that figured out. After clarifying things with the permit office, it turned out that I only needed an engineer to stamp the foundation, since this pier and beam style isn't something that's really laid out in the building codebook. Thankfully, I got connected with an engineer who was able to quickly engineer the foundation and signed off on using footings with a 30-inch by 30-inch by 12-inch base, dug to a depth of 18 inches, with a grid of number 5 rebar in this area for reinforcement. The base of the footing then transitions to a round pier, which will form using sonotubes, and there will be steel J-bar running from the square base into the sonotube to tie these sections together. The sonotube will be cut to height at grade, then our beams, or girders, which are made up of triple layered pressure treated 2x12s, will sit on the piers on 6x6 post base brackets, which will be connected to the piers with wedge anchor bolts. And after adding this information to the building plan reflecting how exactly we'd be building the foundation, I got the building permit submitted on October 13th, and then a few days later... All right, third time is a charm. Got my building permit. So now things can officially get started. Yeah, buddy, let's draw a bulldozer.
Ooh, nice. Child genius.
With my building permit in hand, I could finally get to work getting the site prepped for building, starting with removing the trees which would interfere with the building. Before contacting an arborist, I roughly laid out the location of the building with a string line and some jet stakes, just to give the arborist an idea which trees would need to be removed. After an initial consultation, I received a quote of $2,800 to remove about a dozen trees, and after agreeing to this estimate, the crew from Smartfellers came out to remove the trees. And watching the Smartfellers team work was pretty awesome, and it was immediately clear that they really knew what they were doing. The team started by removing a few of the smaller trees, which could be cut down all at once rather than in sections, to clear an area around the larger trees. And while part of the team worked on cutting the trees into more manageable chunks, the other part of the team got the chipper up and running to turn the brush and smaller trunk sections into mulch. Once the smaller trees were down, the real precision work began, removing the larger trees. On these larger trees, one arborist would get up in the tree, trimming off the smaller limbs as they ascended. Once they got towards the top of the tree, the arborist would attach a rope about halfway up the topmost section that they were going to cut off, so the section could be safely guided to the ground, and then that section could be removed. Once the top section was removed, the arborist could then just work their way down the tree, cutting manageable sections and dropping them to the ground, until they got the tree short enough to where they could drop the remaining portion safely, again with more ropes guiding the tree to the ground. And the Smartfellers crew repeated this process on the rest of the trees, removing roughly a dozen trees in total, and they were done by lunchtime, which was pretty amazing. So while the arborists finish up, let's take a second to talk about the sponsor of this week's video, Bespoke Post. So Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club delivering awesome boxes of top shelf goods. In my first shipment, I received this beautiful 3-piece decanter set along with a wooden bar tray, perfect for displaying the decanter and glassware. And I have a feeling this whole set is going to find a home in this tiny house so that our guests can enjoy a nightcap while unwinding. I also received this beautiful Damascus steel knife handmade by Buck and Bear Knives, and as both a whiskey and knife geek, it's kind of like Bespoke Post read my mind with this first shipment. Bespoke Post subscription is unique as the boxes are tailored to your interests after taking a brief quiz during sign up, and each box is packed with over $70 worth of gear, even though the subscription is only $45. The gear inside is always something new and interesting, and you can preview the box before it ships and also have the flexibility to pause the subscription or cancel at any time hassle-free. So if you want to check out one of these awesome boxes for yourself, head to the link in the description and use the code CRAFTED20 to get 20% off your first box. And thanks again to Bespoke Post for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to work. After the arborist finished up, I still needed to deal with the log sections I had them leave behind for firewood, and thankfully my father-in-law came over to help get everything piled up on some simple firewood racks I had put together, and I'd say this firewood should last us quite a while. Another site prep related task I had done later in the build process was having a few stumps ground down, and this stump grinder was quite the machine and was actually remote controlled, I guess to keep the operator away from the machine while it's in operation. And I didn't really know what to expect here, but this thing chewed through this massive maple stump in a matter of minutes, and this stump was located right in the middle of the building site and really had to go. So with that, the actual site prep was pretty much done, except for dismantling our fire pit area, which is kind of on the way to the site, and my buddy Seth from Burn Peak decided to help out with this. So I was planning to do this with the mini excavator I'll be renting in next week's video, but Seth decided that since I was going to have to move all these rocks anyway, we might as well take advantage of the situation and whip up a quick RC crawler course.
Yep.
And let me tell you, this night of RC, cocktails, and hanging out with my buddies Seth and Alex was just what I needed to de-stress after dealing with all of the bureaucratic red tape, and I think that's where I'm going to end this first part of this tiny house build series. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed part 1 of this series. Again, I'm gonna be putting these out every week, so if you are interested, go ahead and get subscribed and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of the future videos. And last, I wanna give a huge shout out to all of my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube members. If you wanna learn more about those programs, I'll have a link to those as well. And I guess until next week, thanks for watching y'all, and happy building.
I think you got it. Hold on.
That was cool.